But I envision more of these lawsuits happening, you know, Black spaces that were created because of systemic issues. There would be no need for a directory of Black doctors if there wasn't a long history of medical racism and experimentation on Black people. Hey y'all, Janice on the mic. A couple days ago, I saw a headline that basically said that a white doctor is suing this online directory called Find a Black Doctor, which basically is a place for Black people to find Black physicians and dentists around the country. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence that suggests that when Black patients and Black people have healthcare providers that are also Black, their health outcomes are more positive. Their experiences within healthcare institutions are more positive and are better, and they just have overall better experiences. I'm gonna put some resources in the show notes if you want to read more. But anybody who's ever opened a history book about the history of systemic racism in the US should have a modicum of understanding regarding systemic racism and systemic issues within healthcare. So it's wild that essentially this white doctor was salty that he, I guess, applied to be part of this directory and didn't hear, according to, I think, a BET article that I read about this, he didn't receive a response back. I think he reached out again about being in the directory, and he's suing now for discrimination. There is apparently this conservative law firm called Do No Harm. I was not familiar with them before, but they're representing this individual. And I just want to say, we are exhausted. This is exactly what I talk about in my new book, Rise and Resist. So I have this new book out where I talk about the history of Black resistance and what Black people globally have done to push back against harmful and racist systems. And in one of the chapters, I talk about alternate systems, and I talk about Timnit Gebru, who was a researcher at Google, and she was ousted. According to Gebru, she was fired. Google claims she resigned. But essentially, there was contention over a research paper where she was talking about the issues at Google. And as a Black woman, you know, she talked about the systemic issues she saw at Google, and she wrote about it in more detail in a paper. And she essentially, after she left Google, or she was ousted, or she was fired from Google, she created her own system. I believe it's called DARE. And it's just like a organization that she created on her own. And a lot of what we will have to do during this time and during this era is to create our own alternate systems. And what's problematic about the whole situation is even when we do create our own systems, these folks still are mad and salty that they're not being centered. This is also why I feel like every video is a chance to plug my books, because this is also why I wrote my third book, was called Decentering YTness in the Workplace, and this is exactly what I talked about in my book, where I basically said that whiteness as a system, right, white culture, white norms, white values is at the center. And within our workplaces, within our neighborhoods, within our communities, within our education system, white people, white education is at the center. How much do we know about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and all of these other white people compared to what we know about Native Americans and indigenous folks, Black folks, any Asian folks, like any other non-white group? It's wild that even when we create our own alternate systems, the people who are from the dominant culture are salty that they're not included. And so it's just wild because, you know, I see more of these things happening. It started, I think, initially with the Fearless Fund a few years ago, where the conservative law firm led by Edward Bloom You know, his niece, I believe, is Abigail Fisher, who was the young white woman who sued University of Texas in Austin because she didn't get in, and she claimed that a minority student took her spot, which was not actually true. But I envision more of these lawsuits happening, you know, Black spaces that were created because of systemic issues. There would be no need for a directory of Black doctors if there wasn't a long history of medical racism and experimentation on Black people. An amazing book to read if you've never read it before is called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, and it's a really thick book. It's like probably like this big. And in the book, she goes into a lot of detail regarding the history of systemic racism within our medical system. You know, for those of us who identify as women or femmes, when we go to the gynecologist and we get a pap smear, the speculum that is used for the pap smear was actually developed by J. Marion Sims, who was the super racist doctor who experimented on enslaved women. And that's how he developed the instrument that is used today in modern gynecology. So it's just so infuriating when you sit and think about it. But what I will come on here and say is, because I don't like to just make videos talking doom and gloom without offering what my version of solutions is. And I think we have to continue to resist, continue to fight back, read my book, because as I was writing the book, it inspired me so much to read about all of these Black people throughout history. Kwame Nkrumah, Ida B. Wells, Toni Morrison, all of these all of these Black people who fought back and engaged in their own forms of resistance against whiteness and supremacy culture and all of the barriers that they face. Some of these Black people are still alive. You know, I talked about Tarana Burke, who was the founder of the Me Too movement, and all of these amazing people and how they resisted. We need blueprints, especially right now, where these folks are trying to get crafty. They're studying us. You know, I talked to y'all about how one of the architects of Project 2025 studied Black resistance for his dissertation. These folks are studying us. They're trying to figure out how we are so strong and together and powerful, and they're trying to infiltrate our systems and break them down. You know, we need to continue to fight back. We need to also learn our history, that we are sharing the history, that we are sharing what we learn with each other, and that we are intentionally building community. These folks know that the strength within the Black community and within all different indigenous communities of the global majority lies in our community, right? So many whiteness, one of the tenets of whiteness is this individualism, and cultures outside of white culture are very collectivist, and that's where we draw a lot of our strength. So we have to continue to come together, to strategize, to organize, to be intentionally in community with folks who are liberation minded, right? So that's important to mention. One thing I do want to say though, I posted about this on my LinkedIn, and somebody brought up a good point, which I have talked about, right? I've talked about systemic racism in healthcare and in medicine. I've also talked about how having a Black doctor alone doesn't mean that you won't be a victim of racism. I talked about Dr. Jackie. I believe she's on some show on Bravo or something. But she was a Black woman who a couple years ago, a video of her went viral where she was kind of belittling Black women's pain and talking about her patients. She's a OBGYN, I believe. And she was talking about how Black women are over exaggerating their pain. And it's like she was contributing to an already prominent and harmful narrative about Black women and how we're stronger than most people think and how we don't feel pain and all of these things. And so, you know, even with the case of, there was, and it's so horrible that I'm forgetting his name. There was a Black man that was harmed and ended up dying because of 5 Black Memphis police officers, I believe, and I'm gonna get his name and flash it across the screen, but his name is escaping me, but I wrote an article about it years ago. And I'm bringing that up to say that the presence of a Black person alone won't erase racism. However, and this is a big caveat, based on the research, having a Black doctor means you are more likely to have your health concerns addressed and not overlooked and ignored. And so there is valid research that indicates that having a Black doctor will increase your likelihood of having positive health outcomes. And so I think that that cannot be overlooked, but it's important to make sure that I mention. What I'm saying is not a Black doctor alone will erase hundreds and hundreds of years of systemic issues, because Black people have also, some Black people have drank the Kool-Aid. Some Black people, many of us, have internalized oppression. Audre Lorde, I always quote her for this particular quote where she talks about that piece of the oppressor that's buried deep within us. And so we cannot act like we're all breathing the same contaminated air. So we cannot act like it's not affecting all of our lungs. All of us are breathing the same contaminated air, and it's affecting us all in different ways. And so I do think that that's important to mention, but it cannot be overlooked, the fact that there's a wealth of research that indicates having Black doctors means your issues are less likely to be overlooked. You know what I'm saying? Because as a Black woman, if I'm a doctor and you come to me about pain or issues, I understand the pain of a Black woman as a Black woman. So I'm likely going to be more empathetic and more understanding than somebody that has no conception of what it's like to walk a mile in the shoes of a Black person. I'm not saying you can't be a good doctor if you I'm not saying you can't be a good doctor to a patient of another race if you don't belong to that race. But what I'm saying is that hundreds of years of systemic racism has made it so that Black people, Black women have horrific experiences within healthcare systems. And there's this mistrust. And so this directory exists to address that barrier and those issues. And it's just really disgusting that these folks see we've created our own alternative systems that are successful, and they're salty and they're trying to tear it down. But I would expect nothing more from people like this. So I'll leave it at that. I wanted to make this video super quick in case y'all hadn't heard about the story, but I will leave more resources. I saw it initially from Larry Daniel Favors had a video on it, and then I did my own research and I saw a BET article about it. So I'll drop that in the show notes in the comment section below, and I'll also put resources in case you're interested in reading more about why having Black doctors and Black physicians is so important, especially for Black people. And yeah, that is where I will leave things off. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.